smart buildings is an MEP focused cutting edge technology. I always make the reference to, I don't know if you saw Gremlins 2, but it's basically it's a building where these alien little bear creatures, kind of gremlins, I should say, sort of like try and take over the world. But in that movie, right, they're in a smart building, right? And the elevators talk to the people, right? And all this amazing, cool stuff happens. It's very futuristic. And our smart buildings department is on that same sort of mission.
Who is more intelligent, structural engineer or MEP engineer?
A lot of structural engineers have master's degrees, so I would probably go with structural. Some of the best mechanical engineers that I know, like me and stuff, we didn't do too well in school. I got my bachelor's, but I wasn't the best student. So
I have to say that master's is not the. It's not. It doesn't mean that someone is smart or not. But
well, you said intelligence, Owen. I went by the intelligence.
Yeah, that's
word,
true.
Right?
Oh.
Yeah. Smart is different than intelligence. Yeah,
different.
Yeah, street smarts.
Okay.
Running a business. There's a lot of smarts there. Right?
Sure.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Bricks and Bytes podcast, where we dive into construction and AEC technology. Before we get started though, if you're a startup founder or operator responsible for innovation in your company, or you want a deeper, more insightful look into technology in AEC, you won't want to miss our newsletter. From deep dives into particular technologies such as AI, robotics, design, software, and so on. Hot takes from investors betting big in AEC technology, and advice on building tech companies, including the stories and takeaways of the most successful AEC technology founders. Head over to www.bricks-bytes.com and sign up today to get this exclusive material straight to your inbox. And now for the episode. Are you interested in finding out how companies scale past the $10 million ARR ceiling? This episode is one of the number of episodes forming part of our new go-to-market guide, which reveals how industry leaders scaled past the stubborn $10 million ARR mark using strategies specifically designed for AEC. Discover the proven land and expand blueprint, pricing models at work, and real case studies from companies with significant exits. To get your copy, visit www.bricks-bytes.com/GTM.
Okay, Rob. Wow, they changed the interface on here. I was just checking we started. And we have. So, hey, Rob, thanks for coming. Yeah, we're going to dive into a little bit about Syska Hennessy and your innovation process. But before we start, could you guys tell us, or you tell us, and our guys and girls, about what you do, what your role is, and perhaps what you do on a day-to-day?
Sure. So, Syska Hennessy is a mechanical, electrical, plumbing, fire protection consultancy with a whole suite of other services that we call ICT that do low voltage, design, fire alarm, security, AV, IT, and a whole suite of other things. Smart buildings is another specialty that we have. My role at the firm is kind of three parts. Me and two other gentlemen are in charge of operations for the entire firm in the U.S. My other role is I'm the CTO of the firm. I'm in charge of standards, guidelines, tech, and innovations for the firm. And like any good practicing PE, I dive still into projects, especially the large projects, engineer of record on a couple of them. There's nothing like staying at the top of your industry and what you're doing by being involved. So my projects are mostly data center projects, commercial office buildings, towers, and aviation terminals. That's kind of like my specialty areas.
Mm-hmm. What's the revenue of Syska and size of how many employees have you got?
So we're approaching 200 million in revenues. We have approximately 700 people. We're headquartered in New York. We have large offices in Chicago, LA, and Charlotte. And then we have a whole host of other offices, 20 plus people, and I'll call it the NFL cities, about 16 total. We have two offices we have one established office in Dubai in the Middle East, and we have one soon-to-be office in Saudi Arabia, and then we have an office in Shanghai, China.
Global.
Mhm. We
Okay.
are global.
All right, cool. So when we spoke last time, Rob, we went through your approach to innovation, and you mentioned these things: external investments, internal R&D,
Mhm.
and corporate ideation. How did you come to that three-pronged approach?
So it's a pretty cool journey. I'll try and summarize it so it doesn't take forever, but I'd say in 2019 I was approached by Alan Prager and Jesse DeVitt of Building Ventures Group, and they were asking my opinion of a specific startup company called Envered, which was a great company. It was a company that scrubs carbon dioxide out of the air to reduce the amount of outside air you need in a space. And it was cool. I really enjoyed kind of going through vetting a company type of process, and I did it just because they asked. Then they started talking about this whole ecosystem that's involved, that companies are investing in startups specifically in our space. They talked about a company called Nuforma, which Syska had used, and come to find out that Building Ventures invested in that company. They The founder of that company, Jim Forrester, actually used to work at Syska. And it's funny, that's why the software seemed to work so well for us, because he had been solving the pain points of the shop drawing and the project management process at Syska at a software company. So immediately I was intrigued. I went to the board and I said, hey, we need to be part of Building Ventures platform, et cetera. Long story short, because of the type of company we are, et cetera, it took about a couple of years. We had to form a separate subsidiary in order to be able to do anything with money outside of our core business. So in 2021, we formed Syska Innovations with the goal of basically partnering and investing in external seed stage companies, right? Pretty straightforward. And along that journey, we started meeting some really amazing people. I met KP Reddy from Shadow Ventures Group, and they're very similar to what Building Ventures does. And they had a community, and the same thing. They were sending a lot of new companies. Hey, Rob, what do you think about this company? And through them, I met a lot of people in the industry. And then Thornton Tomasetti was another group that we had done a lot of business with, or kind of like a partner company of ours. And they approached us about forming a group called AEC Angels. And through that, we kind of tailored up our internal investments through that group. I guess we'll probably talk more about that later. But Thornton Tomasetti has a group called Core Studios, which does R&D internally. It's amazing what they're doing and what they've been able to do. They develop software and other things. So I went to our board and I said, hey, I think we need an internal R&D program similar to what TT's doing. They said, absolutely, it's a great idea. So we went away and we basically we spent a good year going through a process of coming up with what we call our corporate ideation program of how do we get the ideas and things that are involved into some sort of process so that we could actually do the R&D and develop products and tools. And so that kind of sprung this three-prong approach. That little journey got us to sort of these three little areas that we invest in, and that's Syska Innovations kind of, I guess, marching orders.
So Syska Innovations, is it like an internal incubator, or is it more like a CVC?
That's a good question. It's kind of like a mix of both, right? So the team, so there's a group of people, right? There's a small group of people that are on a steering committee. There's about 12 of us. And that steering committee looks at the investments and does the external piece. And then we tap the entire firm's resources to evaluate the different technologies and commercialization, et cetera. On the internal R&D, we have a select group of individuals. We have a couple of full-time and intern people doing it, but a lot of it is we assign assignments to our R&D just like you would get a project assignment. So we've got a whole host, probably 30 or 40 different team members that have assignments to do things like programming, coding, researching, stuff like that on R&D. And then corporate ideation program is run by what we call a coaches network. That's probably a topic in and of itself. And that's how we sort of do the corporate ideation. So, technically we're not a CVC. We don't lead any investments. We are always a add-on investor on processes. We haven't led anything just yet.
How big is the fund, if you can say?
I cannot say, but we're not dropping seven figures into companies like, the Camber Creeks and the Parkways, et cetera. We're strategic investors. We do it, obviously everybody likes an ROI, but we do it more because it aligns with our vision. When we're talking to our clients, we have to be telling them that we're analyzing the latest and the greatest products that are out there for our facility, the latest and greatest tech. I need to be able to expose that to our team as well, so they're using the latest and greatest tech. And then even on the flip side, understanding where the future is going to be, where the future is going, right, and making sure that we're in lockstep and we're driving the disruption of this industry that we're in from within, as opposed to somebody coming in from external to space and disrupting it on us. That's really the driver of this process. If we partner, we feel like we'll be ahead, we'll drive the boat, we'll make change in the industry. If we didn't make the investments, I feel like somebody would come in and kind of disrupt the industry, and then we would be left out in the cold.
Okay. Okay. Robert, would you say this is like a competitive edge of yours? I don't know if there's other people within your industry that you compete with that have a similar setup. Maybe you can answer that. But is it also a competitive edge?
So it's interesting. So when we signed up, when we decided we were going to do this corporate ideation program, and we were going to establish an R&D, I did what anybody else does. I was like, all right, well, what is everybody else doing? And we couldn't find any other MEP engineer firms that were doing anything similar to what we were going to try to accomplish. There was a lot of other companies, so we had to kind of learn, we looked at innovation styles, we looked at processes, approaches. We studied everything from Disney's innovation approach to HP's funnel to Amazon. Amazon has an innovation idea methodology. And it's funny, we actually settled on, I came upon a great video from a gentleman who worked at Chick-fil-A at the time. His name was Leo Chan. And this guy, he had this awesome presentation about how to set up something internally. And, Chick-fil-A is it's a fast food restaurant, and then I remember the first time I told my partners about it, I'm like, hey, I'm going to design a corporate ideation program around this, similar to what this guy's doing from a fast food restaurant. They were like, well, what about TT? What about DPR? What are these guys are doing? And I'm like, well, I really like what this guy's doing.
They're missing out.
And his philosophy was, you need, innovation to drive innovation in a firm, right? It needs to be decentralized, and it needs to touch as many people in the firm as you possibly can, as opposed to a centralized approach where it's like these five guys are off in the corner doing some pretty awesome stuff. So
magicians.
So we basically took a lot of the framework of what we were doing from that presentation. Incidentally, he actually left Chick-fil-A a couple of years later. He has a company called Abound Innovation, and he does innovation style coaching and training. In my opinion, it's of the best in the world in innovation. And he trains our coaches, which I'll talk about in a second, on a pretty regular basis about how to be innovative, how to be curious, how to come up with ideas, how to find pain points, all the things that you want to do as an innovation, part of your company, how to gamify things. It's pretty impressive what he was able to do. So the first thing we did was we came up with a coaches network, right? So we went around, we decided like, all right, there was, I had about 40 people, and we went through 6 different workshops. That's kind of how the Harvard Business Review program for innovations looks, to teach you about innovations. So we went through 6 workshops, and through those workshops, we came up with okay, we're going to build an innovations coaches network. We're going to develop a process called SysDev, 4 easy steps in how we start from an idea, you work your way through a process, and you get to what we call the end game, which, could be anything, could be commercialization, could be done, could be failure, right? And we decided to pick coaches, and those coaches would meet on a regular basis. We would train those coaches on a monthly basis about the things we were just talking about, how to be curious, right? How to different techniques, right? The techniques, I think, are really important, right? A lot of people think of innovation and they think of brainstorming and everything, and it's just like, okay, let's get in a room and let's talk about it. But there's a lot of very specific facilitated ways that you can drive curiosity, ideas, come up with pain points, that we're training our coaches
We'll
on.
come back to that point.
Yeah. So, the coaches network was interesting because initially out of the gate, when we were picking the coaches network, it was the most innovative people that we had at the firm. They were bought into the vision and they were super, super excited. But then as we come to find out, everybody at Syska has a quote unquote day job, right? So a lot of the people that were really inspired by the vision and this and that were extremely busy. So we pivoted a little bit halfway through this, reimagine the team a little bit, with a different level people, kind of a mix of different people. And then at the same time, I brought on a full-time innovations project manager. So he had a digital development background, so product and software design. And he organized our coaches network, and he also organized our software and our tech stack in how we develop things in the R&D group, which we can talk about later, which, those things kind of really spearheaded a lot of the success that we've had.
Wow. There's a lot there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a lot. I'm very curious, being in construction, I've not come across many times MEP like designs I'm not aware of innovation actually within your space. Can you tell us maybe briefly what is the current technology that is out there that has been used for a long time, and like what innovation are we talking? Is it software for the design or perhaps some other ways of innovating within your space?
Gotcha. So those 3 buckets that we talked about, right? Whether it's an external investment, us developing it, or just generating corporate ideation within the company, we kind of treat those as we treat those as the guiding principles. But then we have 7 buckets that we try and target from an innovation standpoint, right? So basically, it was kind of like when we started, if somebody submitted an idea or we invested in a company that had nothing to do with the AEC space, like, we're not interested, right? So we had to come up with the areas that we wanted to dive deeper in. So smart buildings is an MEP focused, cutting edge technology. I always make the reference to, I don't know if you saw Gremlins 2, but it's basically it's a building where these alien little bear creatures, kind of gremlins, I should say, sort of like try and take over the world. But in that movie, right, they're in a smart building, right? And the elevators talk to the people, right? And all this amazing, cool stuff happens. It's very futuristic. And our smart buildings department is on that same sort of mission, right? So anyway, so smart buildings is an area. Overall digitization, anytime you're digitizing anything, a workflow, a process, products and methods. I'll talk about the products because they're the ones that I think you'll kind of realize, oh, okay, like I see where innovation and how much innovation can come in the MEP space. Eco-innovation is another one that we talk about. Eco-innovation is anything that has to do with sustainability and making the planet a better place. We often get asked by our clients, can you get us to net zero, right? And a lot of times we have to say no, because there's no products available to get you to where you need to be in the space that you're in. But, here's the pilot of a company called Aeromine that puts small scale windmills on the side of industrial buildings, right? It's not 100% proven, but they're looking for people. It's an investment company, right? Now you start to see my methodology. Now, when we approach some of our industrial customers, like, hey, listen, I know you're putting solar all over the roof, but at the edge of your roof line, how about dotting these things in? You get some more power out of there. So the industrialization of design, right? Not just AI. I think there's a big stage of, I call it process automation, that I think the world still needs to go through even before you can really dive into AI in our space. And that's sort of our design process, right? Then there's project design, which is basically the meat and potatoes of what we do. So any widget or piece of software that makes us more productive in what we do. And then lastly is project management, the overarching management. So if something fits into those 7 buckets, right, we'll either invest in that company, we'll take an idea internally and try and spin it into something, right? And basically we'll either develop software, invest in a company, or help develop a product.
That's very good. How do you measure the success of an innovation program?
So our goals every year are to reduce the FTE productivity by about 10 people. So we want to become 10 people more productive through what we develop. And then we want to generate enough revenue. So, a lot of times we'll, like there's a blog post and some things that we did regarding liquid cooling in data centers. And we've been exposed to some super high edge technologies through our clients. And, through that, we were able to generate, revenue, right? So generating revenue from either the returns on the investments that we make or through additional work that's generated, we like to pay for ourselves essentially. So our goal is to improve our productivity 10 times, through 10 people, and then basically also generate enough revenue to cover the cost of the labor and the investments that we make on a per year basis.
Very good. I wanted to ask if MEP Space is like saturated perhaps in software solutions right now, or do you get a lot of startups working on hardware? Like, what was the ratio here?
It's a good mix, initially, a lot of the inbounds that we were getting were product-related, physical products. Obviously, the companies that were talking to us with the physical products, knowing that we specify and we're one of the largest MEP firms on the planet, there's obviously a benefit for them to be in partnership with us. But what we found is like we're not interested in something that's like a commodity play or something that does something more like slightly efficient. There's a company called HVAC Manufacturing and Technology, and they came up with this device called a smart valve, right? So in about 60 to 70% of the air conditioning designs across the US, there's a device called a VAV box. And essentially a VAV box is what it says. It's a variable airflow valve. And what it does is it varies the air into a space so that you could maintain temperature within the space. And MEP engineers, we spend a lot of time sizing 8 to 10 different sizes of these boxes out in a space to, make sure that, we get the proper amount of regulation so people don't feel hot or cold. It's a very big part of our industry. So this team came up with a very innovative box that basically can eliminate all the 10 boxes we talked about. You only have to buy one, and it can throttle all the way down to where it needs to be, and it can maintain accuracy within 5 or 6%. So basically, the way I equate it to is, when we had hats that were fitted hats, right, for years, and you had to go out and buy size 7 or size 7.25, and then you fit it, right? And then all of a sudden, somebody came up with the hat that has the buttons on the back, right? And then all of a sudden, all you got to make is one hat, and you sell it out, right?
I loved it.
So this box literally does that to our industry, and it's funny you talk about controversial. Some of my partners were like pissed because that's a lot of design revenue for us. If now all we have to do is the one
Yeah.
box that goes out there, right? But
Does everything.
but at the same time, now,
Mm.
it for some things we do for like laboratories, like when the hoods are on and things are rocking and rolling, they need a ton of airflow in the space, right? And sometimes we'd have 3 or 4 different VAV boxes and a lot of different control sequences, and then it would have to ramp all the way back down when the hoods and stuff are off down to a very low volume. So now this one box replaced a whole bunch in a lab facility, or for a client like WeWork that changes their space type all the time, this same box can handle a conference room and a multi-purpose room, or can handle a whole bunch of people in the space. And it can also, you can just, take everything out and put individual desks in, and you don't have to touch the air conditioning, right? So,
Mhm.
niche products, highly specialized, but there's so much room for innovation in the MEP industry. It's pretty cool.
I love this because you would never really know this exists unless obviously you work in the field, right? It's not like like particularly wow factor
Mhm,
mainstream technology, but obviously has such a large impact
mhm.
and huge opportunity for people that actually come up with this technology
Yeah.
to create a would I say life-changing or some kind of
Yeah.
Cooler
good
spaces.
return.
Yeah.
Cooler
Cooler,
spaces.
Or cooler spaces.
spaces. Yeah.
Hey listeners, I want to take a quick break to remind you about the Bricks and Bytes newsletter. If you're interested in learning about the technology shaping the future of construction, you won't want to miss the valuable insights we share each week. To get this exclusive content delivered straight to your inbox, head over to www.bricks-bytes.com and sign up today. Link is in the show notes. Back to the show.
On this box example, let's just very briefly hijack this. Is it a startup or is it an incumbent who just came up with a better product?
I would call them a startup. It's a semi-established company, in terms of like they were sort of an outsourced manufacturer, and then they kind of dove into something very specific to develop this. And Yeah, I would call them a startup.
Mm. Rob, how does I would love I think I've got two questions.
Mhm.
That one of your innovation procedure or process or setup is very organized and extensive.
Mhm.
How do you realistically roll something like that out? Like how long does it take?
Mhm.
What people and positions do you need to do it? And then how do you keep it going?
Yeah. So, being that we're a consulting engineering business, right? Kind of like a law firm type of thing. Our asset is people, right? We sell time. And then at the end of the year, because of the way we're set up as a corporation, the profits usually get distributed to the people, in the company, basically, right? Um, as opposed to a large manufacturing or a product company that basically banks resources, sells widgets, invests money, and makes a return, yada yada yada. So it's very difficult to go to a consulting engineering company and ask for a ton of money to do an innovations program and come up with these sorts of things, because you're basically taking away either from the profits or from the billable time of your staff, right? So I had to do this in a very staged environment, right? Also, we're not of a significant size. We're not like Jacobs or some of these other massive firms that could throw a ton of money at these things. We had to do it strategically. So um, it took us about a year to go through the workshops to come up with the process we call SysDev for internal ideation. At that point, we had a couple of successes, and my partners were like, okay, we're willing to let you bring on a full-time employee. We brought on a full-time employee. At that point, it took off like a rocket ship. I don't know if it's probably mostly because of him. This gentleman, David Victor, he's a very, you know, entrepreneurial, forward-thinking, highly energetic person. He's driving a lot of the things that we came up with across the firm. in a very strong, consistent manner. And coming up with some amazing ideas. One of the things that we're always worried about is like after you talk about these things, does it go stale? Like, what do you talk about next? So we've come up with a lot of different things so that our topics don't go stale. And one of them is called InnoPoints, right? So basically, we have an internal competition internally every quarter. And we award points every time somebody in the firm does something innovative, right? A couple points if they like a blog post, couple points if they recommend an idea, if they specify if they specify a product that we invested in, they get some points. If they make a presentation, right? Any sort of innovative activity across the firm, you award. And we're getting, 20 some odd percent of the firm is like in part of this InnoPoints thing. So they're like competing against each other by gamifying things or sort of keeping things fresh. And, it's part of the reason why we invest in these external companies, even though, like I said, the ROI isn't our first thing. It's because you're attached. If people know they're going to get points and they might win a prize, then it's just this sort of third linkage to keep
Incentive.
you attached. Right?
Was the Chick-fil-A guy, was that his idea or yours?
That was David's, I believe. That was his idea when
Okay.
he came. Yeah.
Very smart.
Mhm.
Have you seen have you seen the quantity of technology solutions available increase in the more recent times? And does that correlate to more quality of solutions or not?
Well, I'd like to say that a lot of the software solutions that came out are kind of like disrupting our space and really getting mainstream, but they're all still very much in their infancy, the software solutions that are trying to disrupt the AEC space. Our space is very difficult. It's very it's codes driven. By climate, everything changes. Even in the last 5 years, there was a lot of the designs and things that we used to do used to be much more cookie cutter and similar type of process, simple type of building systems. But building systems account for a huge portion of the pollution in the world, and a lot of building departments and countries are realizing that. So they're basically examining these buildings very in great detail. So, for instance, in New York City, there was a law that was passed that was basically restricts the amount of carbon that a building can emit. Otherwise, they have to pay a fine, right? And essentially, what that means is like, all right, let's look at the building. What is it emitting carbon from, right? 80% of why it emits carbon has to do with mechanical and electrical systems in the building. So now all of a sudden, spotlight on my industry, right? Awesome, right? Now, and what happened is now, the owners are spending more money, right? The codes are more restrictive in what we design. So if we were designing sort of like Chevys to just sort of be somewhat efficient and kind of get through what we need to do, now like we're designing like spaceships for these buildings. Before we had a fossil fuel boiler and it burned natural gas and it made hot water. Now we're using air source heat pumps that are powered by photovoltaics and wind turbines and batteries and other sorts of things. So it kind of like pushed our industry, right? And now the designs that we make are so much more complicated
and expensive, I guess, as
and
well,
expensive
to execute.
Correct.
Okay, and is there this hardware piece? So you have to specify more complex devices. Is there a supply of this hardware, like kind of up to date, or is there a good supply of the good devices on the market, or there is a lack of that?
So I think the heat pumps is probably the easiest kind of specific product to talk about. So 15 to 20 years ago, there wasn't so much heat pumps out there. It was much cheaper to just use natural gas and other fossil fuels to heat your homes, your buildings, your apartments. Heat pump technology's come a long way. It's not 100% there, but it works in the lower range temperatures now. Before it would kind of lock out. So now the solutions are possible, right? The thing is now that the codes are mandating these things and there's fines, right? It's incentivizing better overall solutions. So we're taking products, things, tanks, storage tanks, for instance, batteries. These are all things that have been around a while. We're compiling them as systems together to get a system that works. And then the different products, the heat pumps, and some of the other products that are kind of niche to that are far enough along now um, to support that sort of mission, if that makes sense.
I guess, I guess as there's more supply, more demand driven by regulation, then there will be more innovation and more competition. So the cost of this would go down at some point, which is good for industry, I think, because there's a push for more innovative solutions.
Yeah. There's, it's how fast. I don't think anybody disagrees. It's better to not burn fossil fuel. It's the speed. What can the market, what can the city accommodate without, going sideways too much or causing too much, sort of economic turmoil, right?
Quick break to let you know, if you're getting value from this conversation, we've compiled insights like these into our comprehensive construction tech go-to-market guide. Inside, you'll find the exact frameworks top AEC tech companies use to break past the $10 million ARR mark, detailed case studies from successful exits, and actionable playbooks for pricing, sales team structure, and enterprise expansion. Head to www.bricks-bytes.com/GTM and transform how you approach growth in construction tech. Now back to our conversation.
Rob, what's some of the biggest pain points you as a MEP design consultant face at the moment?
So it's definitely codes, right? Codes change a ton. The technologies are changing rapidly. There's a lot of that quote hardware that's out there that we have to stay on top of. New products that come along that we have to be at the forefront of. There's also a shortage. Our biggest pain point is there's a shortage of electrical engineers in our specific industry. Electrically, we compete against a whole ton of industries, even everything from computer engineers to to people working for defense companies. So the electrical engineering community is a really big pain point. So we wind up hiring a lot of engineers out of college to try and get them into our industry. We're part of a lot of organizations that help promote our industry to try and get people into our industry, right? That's definitely a big pain point for us. On the innovation side, for me personally, we found a lot of companies that I really I was impressed with and I would have liked to really partner with, et cetera. But, the fact that you have to pick and choose and there's only so much money. So that's a big pain point. We get some really good investments that I don't get to make. There's a company called Argyle out west that's a VR solution that I was super impressed with. Wasn't able to do that. There's another company called Persephone that does carbon accounting, the same thing. We weren't able to make an investment. That's a big pain point for me. And then lastly, the internal ideas. So we've had 2 ideathons. We stage these events and we facilitated to try and get ideas what we were worth to. And we got so many ideas, right? And then we didn't have the third one because, I guess people are kind of like, all right, we're submitting all these ideas, when are we going to get to work on all these things? So you can't hit on a lot of these ideas that are generated. That's another definite pain point.
Interesting.
This regulatory framework is interesting, as I come from structural engineering, and our regulatory doesn't change at all. It's the structure has to stand, and there's physics and there's loadings, and materials don't change much really. Steel, concrete, and like timber or wood in the US. But you guys have to face much more dynamic changes.
Yeah, we're the MEP is more like an applications engineer. Like steel, you just deal in physical products that you specify. We have to specify products that other people make, and then we have to piece it all together and put all these complicated systems together. So it makes the innovation so much. It makes it so much harder to kind of piece it all together, to figure out what needs to be done.
Who is
Rob-
more intelligent, structural engineer or MEP engineer?
A lot of structural engineers have master's degrees, so I would probably go with structural. You know, some of the best mechanical engineers that I
Wow.
know, like me and stuff, we didn't do too well in school. I got my bachelor's, you know, but I wasn't the best student. So
I have to say that masters is not the. It's not. It doesn't mean that someone is smart or not. But
well, you said intelligence, Owen. I went by the intelligence
Yeah,
word,
that's
right?
true.
Right.
Oh.
Yeah, smart is different than
Practicality
intelligence. Yeah,
different.
yeah. Street smarts,
Okay.
running a business. There's a lot of smarts there. Right?
Rob, what solutions are you after?
Right now, we're sort of chasing two different things that I'm really hot on. So, I believe the next level of AI that's going to impact my industry and probably AEC has to do with developing RAGs, which is basically a specific large language model targeted towards a data set that's provided by somebody, right? So right now, like we have developed an internal RAG at Syska, and we search our own intranet for all, you know, our HR handbook, different project stuff, our knowledge then, which is like our standards and guidelines. But I believe having it on a project based, so just like, you know, it's sort of another leg to any project. Right now, when you start design, you have all the different things that you start, the owner's requirements, you get everybody on board, everybody's doing things. And at the same time, you're training an AI model on every piece of information that ever started with this project, right? And training it and specifically focusing on the data. And then you build a job, right? You buy all the equipment, you do your commissioning, you do your testing. The owner's sitting in the building. Now there's facilities managers in there running the building. They're doing things. And the entire time they have this sort of they have this artificial intelligent backbone that's like, you know, getting all the data and the specific information that anybody needs at the life cycle of this to operate, to own, to buy, to sell. I really think that that's the future. So we're deciding whether we want to develop that internally, right? So we have resources, and obviously we did a pretty simple RAG for ourselves. But there's companies out there that we're looking at, that we're piloting with. There's a company called Twin Knowledge. There's a company called Link. There's a company called Trunk Tools, which AEC Angels Group actually invested in, and they're all kind of searching that same track, right? And I believe, you know, somebody's going to start winning in that space. So that's an area we're
There's
big looking at.
no winners yet.
There is no
winners yet?
winners yet. I think Trunk Tools probably has the most money, if I had to guess. But you know,
that helps.
they each kind of focus on specific things. Trunk Tools is focusing on construction managers, right, and the construction side field supers, right. So that's something that we're extremely interested in developing, that side out there.
I was recently speaking with someone about AI, and the bottom line of the conversation was that no one knows if the future of AI innovation within our industry is like a very vertically orientated AI solutions which solve particular workflow, or AI systems which would, with agents, which would then tackle like multiple workflows, connect them, combine them.
Yeah.
in multiple industries.
Within
Like one agent that can tackle, like, I don't know, construction and finance and farming and whatever else. Is that what you're saying?
No. So within multiple workflows within construction, rather than just one workflow and just, oh, this is AI for MEP, for example. Yeah?
So you're saying like someone like Procore would release an agent and that could like deal with the whole project management suite as opposed to just like the drawing side.
Yes. That's a good reflection of that. Yeah. Have you got any thoughts, Robert, on this?
So I mean, there's, you know, I mean, as much as I would sit here and like to say that AI is going to totally disrupt the industry and it's going to do a lot, I think it's going to come in stages. You know, it's going to be slow. There's a legal framework in our industry that is so rigid that, you know, divides a lot of elements of the construction teams apart from each other. Even just the ability, like a company is in the US is not allowed to sign and seal and take professional and ethical responsibility for a building. It's an individual person, right? So now I have to put my sign and seal to say this is done per codes, this and this, et cetera, you know. So, AI and how fast it needs to do things. If AI can't prove to me that it exactly meets codes and everything in the way that I think, you're going to be very hesitant to use it, right? So that's the first sort of like hurdle it has to come over, right? The other piece is the data, right? So specifically, let's talk MEP specifically. So 10 years ago, the codes, the efficiencies, the equipment you use are completely different than the codes, the equipment you specify in the things today. So the data points, a lot of industries have 30, 40 years of data points. Now all of a sudden we're resetting all the data that you need to make all these decisions and things starting from like 2 years ago. There's not enough data. Then you look at it, okay, there's also not enough people willing to share the data. I'm not willing to put the data for my construction projects up for somebody else. There's no like internet that kind of compiles everything to compile it together. So we're siloed. So there's definitely some things. I think it's going to come from the specific components, the specific piece, its ability to search data, its ability to incrementally improve the different things that MEP construction and architects do.
A long way.
Mm-hmm.
We got a long way. Yeah. Did we cover this maybe about how AI, how you foresee AI changing the MEP industry? Or do you think that MEP as a industry is quite resistant to this change?
Like Syska, like our ethos, is like we work on technically complicated projects and we service our clients in a white glove manner, right? And a lot of sort of automated solutions, right, don't really fit into Syska's world. Every design is kind of like a new thing, and we really try and like get as close to our clients' like aspirations as we can. But we do have competitors and others in the space who do what I call more copy and paste type buildings. I built this multi-residential building down the street. This new building's 10,000 square feet bigger. And and there are software solutions out there that basically do a great job of copying and pasting, right? So copying and pasting with a little AI manipulation probably is going to grow in those sort of more commoditized type of approaches, commoditized type of buildings, residential, schools, retail, especially big box retail, right? But in data centers, airport terminals, healthcare, commercial office, high-rise buildings, light industrial, the things that we do, I don't see that. I don't see that piece being able to disrupt as much as some of the more commoditized approaches.
Because it's just too complex and too bespoke, yeah?
Bespoke is exactly correct.
Yeah. Yes. What feedback or advice would you have for founders who are trying to tackle, provide solutions for these more bespoke type of projects?
I would say
space?
spend a good amount of time really understanding what your total addressable market is.
If it's worth it.
Everybody has the same slide when they come talk to me. It's like the construction industry
we had this exact
is
conversation
like,
yesterday.
It's worth $1 trillion, and if I can save 0.1%, the market's $1 billion, blah 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 blah. And you're just like, seriously, And then when you look at it, like Google, for example, about 15, 17 years ago, Google tried to develop a design software to compete with Autodesk. Autodesk and AutoCAD and now Revit like dominate the construction industry. It's like 90% of what everybody uses. Google tried to come up with something. They used the Google SketchUp model. They started putting pipes in. They started putting all these things. And then, we were like, crap. And everybody in our industry, remember I talked about we don't want to be disrupted from outside. We want to disrupt from within. Everybody's like, oh, geez, they're going to do it. They're going to develop it. And at some point, they pulled the plug. And I surmise why they pulled the plug, because they realized like, all right, we're gonna spend X amount of more money on this over X amount of time, and then our ROI for how much software we're selling to the people that you are doing the designs, et cetera. We're not going to be able to, they're not going to be able to fully supplant Autodesk or whoever else, the incumbents, and they basically decided it wasn't worth it.
Yeah, so I've got some thoughts on this. Unless the technology is good enough so that you can bypass the professional to a certain degree. So the technology you can, so the customer can design things, and the professional is only required to do very limited sign-offs. What do you say?
Structurally, I can see where you're coming from on that background. Structurally, like I get it, because you could probably, structural right now, the structural engineers, they're literally designing the shop drawings of the equipment and things that are going in. So they really, because of the way structural engineering is, on the MEP side, it's a lot more difficult. Just because of the nuances. All the different things, the coordination process, right? So structural, you have steel, you put it in, the architect puts the walls around you, and then if anything, an MEP engineer asks you, hey, can I cut a hole in your steel to route my stuff through it, right? On the MEP side, we've got probably about 17 different systems that we have to draw in a model, make it fit inside a building, and they can't hit each other anywhere, basically, right? So it's just that process
is coordination exercise.
That process is so complicated. And it's not even just coordination, it's constructability. Like, can you actually build, we've packed some things in amazingly small spaces, and the architects are super happy with us. And then the contractor's like, that's great, but like, I have no idea how I'm going to be able to build that actually in the field with lifts and devices and stuff. So it does make it. And to me, that's the first step. So we talked about incremental steps. We've tried to start taking this on, but it's really difficult. And I believe somebody in a gaming software is actually going to be able to do this before somebody in the traditional Revit and other world, is to do that coordination. There's a whole industry in what we call clash detection. There's a software called Navisworks that's in there. And basically what it does is it takes everybody's models, the architect, the structural, throws it all in there. And then it does an analysis wherever something hits another thing, right? And you've got a clash, right? So that's obviously not buildable. That's one of our biggest challenges. It's one of the industry's biggest challenges. We're trying to draw as close to what the contractor is going to build as possible, because it makes for a better job, cleaner, and all sorts of things, less change orders, right? But there's no good automated way. It's very hard to draw and completely miss everything else at the same time somebody else is drawing and trying to miss what you're drawing, right? So you're left with a lot of these sort of clashes. And then, of course, the architect always wants the ceiling higher and higher and higher. So you run through these exercises. And I just envision a gaming solution where we put all our systems in, and the gaming solution puts all our stuff like this, and eventually comes with, here's this solution, right? And it's rated, it's 80% efficient on ceiling height, but maybe it's 40% more on equipment. And then you kind of like, all right, if you lower the ceiling, it's going to be blah, blah, blah. I feel like that's an incremental solution. There's some companies who have a goal of doing that. There's a company called Augmenta right now that's doing electrical conduits, like the first piece of it. I know that they have a mission of doing that. To me, that's a huge step in the process. And I think the disruption from MEP, so like architects on design, I think the disruption is going to come forward, right? So there's companies called Schema, right? And they do, and TestFit, they do generative design. They come up with millions of solutions, and they do the concept in the beginning phase awesome. And then they're slowly doing more of the detailing and moving their way forward. On the MEP side, I think it's going to come backwards. I think companies like Augmenta, they're going to take the engineers' designs, and they're going to be able to automatically build the shop drawings from it. And then once they are automatically be able to build the shop drawings and the clash detection, they can take a step back and start implementing design principles into how to make the shop drawings. And then from there, they can step back into DD and then SD. Basically, so we'll have like this, and then in 50 years' time, when architect gets to the end, these get to the end, then we'll truly have that end-to-end solution that kind of, has I won't say AI, because a lot of it, everybody says AI, but a lot of what we do is really just it. I mean, it's algorithms, it's equations, it's math, right? But yeah, I see that as the roadmap to kind of like the ultimate disruption.
I like it. So you're basically saying that architect would then start. They need to have more complex, like a pre-designed solutions from other engineers, and then they can then fit that within their scheme. Yeah, I like it, and I can see this happening.
It seems to be the path. So we invested in schema, we
Yeah.
invested in TestFit, and there's a value, like a company like TestFit. So a developer goes to develop a piece of land, right? And he goes to develop a piece of land. And again, my partners and the architects are kind of like, we're really doing this. They pay us, thousands of dollars to do like 5 or 6 different test fits to show them, hey, this is how many square foot you could build for office. This is how many parking spaces you could fit. Here's the water retention. And then they can do an analysis and decide like, all right, I need this amount of money to build this. The return on the investment from the rent or whatever we're going to get is this. And they come up with sort of, whether the deal is going to pencil out or not, right? And they're doing that based on 5 or 6 architectural and MEP type of basic solutions that we spend a lot of time doing. If those software systems have enough intelligence in them, they basically can do an infinite number of examples and prioritize. Like if they really want, if they want the highest rent that they can get return on the projects, what does that get? If they want the lowest construction cost of what they can get within these parameters, they can do that. They can mix them, 50% this and that, and then all of a sudden, it can come up with that sort of solution. So now you're kicking things off like right on the right size of where you need to be.
Very good.
Rob, what's your thoughts on the engineering hourly rates in the next few years? Coming up, staying as they are, which means lower, getting smaller, or?
Oh man. So structural engineers and civil engineers love to talk about hourly rates. They love that, a lot of their world is hourly rates. I like to talk about.
You said earlier that you are in the business of actually selling your time. So and I'm the same.
It's true. No, it's true. It's true. It's got to change to a value proposition.
Sorry, I didn't add the context within the context of technology, obviously progressing. Yeah.
So listen. So I think, there's this. A lot of people, come up to me and they say, listen, if we come up with an AI solution and it takes us so much less time to do what we do, and then we'll be able to charge the same rates and we'll make a fortune and we'll be rich, I don't subscribe to that. I think any solution you come up with that reduces the amount of effort, et cetera, at some point that's going to get passed along to the owner, right? In what percentage and how that comes, right? So I do think it's always going to be about the value that you bring to the clients. As an MEP solutions, right, there's so many different systems that we do, so many people that are involved. It's very hard to break it down in the specific amount of hours it takes to do this, and that, and the other. So I believe it's value-based. I do believe that engineering prices, especially because of the demand, we're not producing enough engineers in this country. We're not letting enough engineers who come to this country to study stay in this country. That's another problem. We have to fix that. I don't know why we let engineers come from China and from India and all other places in the world. They come to the U.S., train here, and then we don't give them visas to stay here and work. They go back to their home country. So I think that's going to drive, fundamentally, the shortage of engineers is going to drive our fees higher. It's going to drive that we're going to have to pay our engineers more. I do think that the fees, there's the percentage of the construction cost that we get, I think will stay the same, if not slightly go up, if the codes keep increasing on us, the codes and the complications of our systems, right? But the percentages, I feel like those percentages probably stay in place. So if we can figure out ways to make the construction costs lower, and or that'll probably drive our fees in that direction.
Very good. I think this would be an important one to ask, Rob, about any investments or advisory work you've done where perhaps you were wrong about the technology and company's potential and maybe the lessons learned.
Yeah, I've never been wrong. Everybody else has been wrong, right, Owen? No.
Yeah, that's normally the way.
Yeah. So I think on the software side, there's one of the things, and I won't talk about a specific company, but I think we all fell in love with financial projections and um, the people that they had involved, the surroundings of what we were doing, of what they were doing. And I think the fundamentals of the software and what they were doing was something that we missed. We don't, you know, we at the time we didn't have coders, so we couldn't see like what does a code look like? Like what is it actually, this and that. I think that was a miss in the beginning. That's something that we take a little bit more stride with. So we've missed on things that we found out subsequently were much more simple than we thought were. We were sort of, kind of rused on the outside, and the actual code in the background wasn't good. On the product side, I've also learned not to fall in love with the promise or the idea behind it. We had a specific investment that was really doing an amazing things, code generation type product in a market that's very, very difficult to disrupt. And they claimed that they had a lot of they had 80% of the way of it figured out. So it's similar to the VAV box. The VAV box got from 80% to 100% went to market, right? This other solution couldn't get a specific component to work, and the component they needed to get it to work, blew out the price range of the product, and they iterated and iterated, and then eventually it just it ceased. So there's just there's big nuances into the different things that you learn as you go through these processes.
Wanted to ask you, so being 20, 24, 25 years within the industry, and recently when you step into this role of picking and choosing startups, have you got any thoughts on investors in AEC tech? Are they missing something?
Good looks, maybe.
3 years ago, this was like prop tech was the word, and I felt like there was so much interest in technology, and I think a lot of those firms were roosed into like they're going to get a 3-year, a 5-year ROI, and I just think fundamentally, like the investments in our industry, you have to come at it with like at least a 10-year type of horizon. It's just very difficult to disrupt. There's so many different, things that come into play, and they're not going to scale. Most of the solutions don't scale their revenue to the same way that you would want from a VC would want. They want you to scale your revenue super fast, as fast as you can, and then basically at the point after 5 years, cut back your expenses, show that you could generate cash flow, and then they move on. We're finding that the investments and the things that are like they're making incremental things, they're kind of they're moving their way through the process, and then when they get to the end, there's a few of them that really sort of take off, and a lot of the exit plans right now are really being bought by larger companies, right? But like companies like PlanGrid or Nuforma or some of these other companies or even Procore as an example, it took a while for them to kind of get to the point where they could exit, right? And I just think that the VC world now understands that. So the investments, the money that they get behind it, obviously has to have a different horizon and a different thought process, because there's a big ROI at the end of the rainbow, right? But it's most likely not going to come as quick and as fast as a lot of people are expecting.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm trying to look because you're like right near the end, and I feel like we only asked maybe 20% of the questions we have planned.
I told you I'd talk a lot, Owen.
No, it's all good. I'm trying to think of trying to pick one here.
Maybe you think, and I will ask one of my closing.
I've got it. I was going to ask how founders who have a solution that might fit what Cisco's looking for should approach you in a way that stands out to, I don't know, you probably get a lot of calls and emails selling you stuff like why do you entertain one versus the other?
It's interesting. In the beginning, it was, I responded to every LinkedIn request and every email, and now it's a little, it gets a little overwhelming. And, a lot of times I'll barely even read, even if they do come up with some cool email or LinkedIn post or something, I'll barely kind of look at it. The unfortunate answers, a lot of things we wind up looking with are usually because they were recommended or came through somebody that we knew or somebody that was sort of connected in the ecosystem, right? So through the ecosystem, you get some, hey, take a look at this, with the exception of certain things. So like if somebody is doing a clash detection software, right? Somebody's building a digital twin, like some of the things that like I'll look for that like very, very specifically, right? If they have something that I'm really interested in. Other than that, it's mostly through ecosystem that we look at. And then even, if somebody connects with me on LinkedIn and they make some cool blog posts and stuff like that, you recognize who they are. That's another way to get the attention.
Okay. Last one from me is a little bit lightweight question. You mentioned a little bit about earlier, just at the beginning, about creativity. So how do you drive creativity within innovation department or within the organization? Yeah, that's the question.
So part of what we train our innovation coaches on, right? We have like a workshop, and we're trying to train them, like, how do you stay creative? How do you breed curiosity across the firm, right? And there's specific things, like, for instance, when the coaches hold like monthly workshops with those who are curious about innovation in their offices, and they're leading them through certain different type of exercises, right? So I'll give you one exercise. It's called photo serendipity, right? And essentially what you do is you start talking about different pain points that you have within the firm, right? Like what are our clients' pain points, et cetera. And you just start talking, get your mind warmed up. Then there's a random photo generator that randomly generates photos of, could be anything, could be a mountain, could be a guy hiking, could be a tiger. And then basically isolate that photo, right? And start with that photo, right? Start thinking about, like, the five senses that you're thinking in that are happening in that photo, right? And start trying to understand what's going on. And then from those senses, pick the coolest thing that you just found out, like the hiker, or what drives your mind to it, et cetera. And then with those things, try and relate it to the pain points that you were talking about, right? And, just by sort of taking your mind completely away from the project you're trying to solution and looking through a different lens, we've gotten some pretty amazing solutions, right? And it breeds creativity. So a lot of, people think innovation comes from somebody who's just like, all right, they just went home and, started thinking about something that had a great idea. But like, there is some really awesome processes and exercises to run through to really generate these things. And I'd encourage people who want to be in innovations and get innovations to really take a hard look at these things. They're all over the internet. You can Google everything now. I would also recommend do not short circuit yourself with, asking OpenAI, ChatGPT. As much as you can, avoid that, because you will find yourself in a generic space very quickly before you know it.
Yeah, it's like insanely difficult not to do that these days. Like it's so tempting, and so every time you feel like I just need to think about something for a second, you just default like, oh, I'll just ask Claude.
Yeah, there is a place for it, right? There is the next. I believe it's the next step. When you kind of when you have the idea, you have things, and now you need to kind of progress. AI is a tool. It's a tool like any other tool. It's a tool like spell check. It's a tool like anything else that you can kind of use to work your way through to generate some more side ideas, or get some history, getting the history, like, hey, has there ever been somebody who's done this? That's actually one of my favorite things that I ask all the time. We have this awesome idea to do this. Has somebody ever done that before? and it finds like, all right, hey, there is software that does this already. You're like, okay, great. Now.
Yeah. One other way is, which I also found recently, is to ask it to interview you and ask questions around your prompt, and then it makes you think more than just getting the generic response that it would typically give if you don't ask it to ask you questions.
AI leader.
Yeah.
AI leader. Yeah. No, it's it is great for, I'll give you one awesome example. So you had to fundraise for my kids' baseball team, and that's one of the things where you're like, all right, I want to brainstorm, but it's not like business, and you just put it in there, and it's, it came up with a whole bunch of solutions, and one of them was awesome. It was to set up a pitching tent where you could measure how fast somebody throws. It's kind of like a real simple type of thing that you could set up and have the framework to do that. And we're going to wind up doing that. So that was pretty neat.
Perfect. Yeah. Cool. I think we're at the end. So, Rob, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, guys.
I feel like perhaps round 2 is on the cards, given that we've got a few more questions to get through, but we will get there. Cool. Is there any initiative you guys are running at the minute? Like this is like at the end, we always let people plug something that they've got going on. Are you hiring? Are you approaching a big birthday?
So we released an app called DigiDux about a month and a half ago. It's a very specific mechanical design tool that's out there. It's a great product. It's for free. It's for us to give back to our clients and owners, a very specific task that we do. I encourage you to download it. It's definitely the best tool that's out there. It looks nice, the graphics. So please do that. And then follow us on either Syska.com innovations, or follow me on LinkedIn. We do a lot of posting. We do a lot of engagement stuff. And I'd love to interact with different team members on all the things that we talked about today. And, always out there trying to find cool companies to partner with and help disrupt, my industry from within.
Awesome. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you, Rob.
Awesome, guys. Thanks. Take care.